Hey, Archery Talk, this is Lucas, and today I'm sitting down, at least online, with Cody Griffin, the promotions manager at Easton Archery, and he's going to help me figure out how to set up the new Easton ProComp target arrows I've got. Cody, how you doing today?
I'm well, brother, man. How about yourself?
So far, so good. I'm glad it's not so cold up here anymore.
Well, that's good. I'm about to say it's in the mid 50s here. I just actually moved here from North Carolina, so the weather's drastically different from where I'm at.
Yeah, Utah, North Carolina is a change. I'm up in just north in Ontario, Canada. So not it's probably more comparable to Utah than it is to North Carolina weather.
Yeah, indeed, I'd say so. Yes, sir.
So as I mentioned at the top here, I've got some ProComp arrows, some 380 spine. I've been shooting pro field arrows for my target bows for a while for kind of 50-meter and field archery. And I needed some new sticks, and so Easton was kind enough to send over some ProComp 380s. And before I ruin them, I figured I would talk to somebody that knows what they're doing to help me to figure out the best way to set them up. Everything from like what length I should look at, how much point weight I should run, are knot colors worthwhile using, all things like that. So I was sent in your direction, and hopefully you're going to be the one that can help me solve this puzzle.
We'll do our best, man. We'll do our best. I'm excited.
So I guess first we'll go over like basic measurements, and maybe that'll help you point me in the right direction. I'm shooting all the bows at about a 30-inch draw length.
Okay.
And between 55 and 60 pounds on the target bows for the most part.
Right on.
In the past, I was shooting some Easton Pro Fields. They were 420s though, so the spine was a little softer on the spine, and I was shooting them quite short. I think I maybe just like a hair under 28 inches, which is really just enough to clear the rest. So I thought I might go a little longer. Might need to. That's why I went with like a heavier spine.
Yeah, I would say, are you shooting a blade rest so you can still cut some down if you need to?
Yeah, I'm shooting. It depends on the bow. Some of them I've got a Hamsky Trinity target on one, and I've got some blade rests on others. This is also other issue. It's not just for one bow. I use this for testing all the bows I get in, all the target bows I get in.
I got you.
So I need an arrow that'll hopefully work pretty well on multiple setups, which will all have fairly similar specs for the most part, but there'll be a little different.
So, man, how I set up any target shaft, I'll actually run it stiff to start with, or weak to start with, and stiffen it up if I need to. So just to give you a little bit of specs on like my draw length and stuff, I float around 27.25 to 27.5 to maybe even 27.75, depending on the bow and even the axle to axle length. One of my setups right now, and this is a little bit different. I'm shooting a 23 diameter arrow, Super Drive 23. I'm running a 375 spine, and I'm shooting at about 62 to 63 pounds. But I cut my shaft to start with right around 28 for that. And then I have maybe 130, 140 grains up front, and I see what it's doing through paper. But in your scenario, I would probably start your shaft at 29, and and I would hot melt all these points in. We have a nice point system. It's an HL point. I'd probably throw 120 grains up front and, start from there and see how these are group tuning, or you can even paper tune. A lot of guys like to paper tune to start with, and then they'll end up group tuning. But I'd probably start your shaft at 29, maybe 28.5, see how that fares. And, being that you're going to be doing this for field and stuff and feeder rounds, I would say I wouldn't run a big vein on the back of it. I would probably run something from AE like a PM 2.0.
Yeah, I've ran some AEs before, or some Flex 187s, kind of low profile veins on the target arrows in the past. So I will probably continue something along that line.
Yeah.
And I've got the HL points with me. I think they're 130s that you can cut off. So would you suggest cutting them down to 120 to start?
I'll play with them at 130. I'm a tinkerer personally. So, once you cut that point off, there's no putting it back on. So I would say I would start your arrow a little bit longer than what you typically would, probably 29 to say, and throw that 130 grains up front. See how that thing's, tuning out of the bow through paper. And one thing I'm a big fan of is tuning the arrow to the bow, not the bow to the arrow. I'm not a big fan of, playing with the engineering of a bow, moving cams a ton left or right. Every now and then I've had prior horts, that I've had to yoke tune and stuff. And I like yoke tuning. I think it's just easy and it's nice to do on the fly, versus shimming a cam over left or right. But I'm a true fan of leaving my center shot where it's supposed to be at within spec, and then tuning the arrow to the bow itself.
Now, one thing I asked for when Easton was sending over the arrows was I thought about some knock collars, because you're shooting field, or you're shooting even 50 meters, 6 arrows in the group. I'm not a great archer, but you still get close every once in a while, and you start banging the back of those arrows. Are the knock collars, one, will they help kind of prevent damage, and two, will the blade rest kind of get in the way of those ends, whatever the knock collars there?
I don't think they're so big that they're going to mess with the blade rest. I think a lot of people that have issues with blade rest is they're either running their blade too stiff or too weak, and then you can get into the topic of angles as far as the blade. I think most people run theirs right around 35 to 37. I'm somewhere around there if I'm running a blade rest myself, but I've never had clearance issues on a blade rest. And that can even come down with whether your arrow is properly spined. Whether that thing's getting too much, archer's paradox as it's leaving the bow. And a lot of people, they'll use split powder and stuff like that to see if they're clearing. But for me, the way I'll start my bow is the way I'll start my tuning process, I should say, is I'll leave my arrows a little bit longer on purpose, maybe add a little bit more point weight on there, and I'll run it through paper, and I'm not trying to change much at all on the bow, if anything, or the rest. And then, if I'm getting a knock right or a knock left, I might trim the shaft down just a little bit depending on it, or I might add more point weight. Or something along the lines to break down that shaft, vice versa, stiffen or weaken our shaft. But as far as the knot collars go, I dig them. I think it's smart to run a knot collar personally. Field and feed arrows are not cheap for a reason. They're well constructed and well made. And if it saves someone, a couple dollars in the end, I would rather spend that money to put some knot collars on the back of my shaft, just like an extra sense of security for my arrow.
I appreciate that. About cutting the arrows, the ProComps, can you cut both ends? Should you just be cutting off the front? Is there any rules to consider with that?
You can cut from the front and the back as well. Most people just chop them off the front. They're not tapered like a Pro Tour or an X10 to that degree. On the X10s you can only trim off a certain amount from the back. Same thing with the Pro Tour, where you're going to have to start running with fitment issues and stuff like that. So we recommend, I can't remember the exact amount of inches off from the Pro Tour, but back to the ProComp, you can take off any end. I typically just trim mine off the front itself. So, and mainly the reason why is aesthetics for me. I want the label, to be in that back half of the shaft. So if I start chopping the back of it off, I might run into fletching. Fletching's coming onto the label, and it's just my OCD kicks in. But yeah, I would trim a couple inches off from the front. I think those shafts are coming in right around 32. I want to say, I think 32's where they're being full length for that spine. So you can cut a good, 4 or 5 inches off there and still be fine.
Okay, good. So just making sure there was no issues with that. I've never run X10s or anything like that, but I've heard from people from some of those target arrows, you got to be cautious with the back, cutting off the back. So
yeah, years ago, people were. I know Steve Anderson was a big proponent of it. He would chop some off the back, and it would stiffen that arrow up for him. But this is a pure 4mm shaft we're working with here. You don't have that issues as far as tapering and barreled shafts. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, and again, typically I would just run arrows on the spinner and see if they're wobbly. But again, these are 001s. I suspect I'm not going to see a lot of wobble front or back on these things.
These are beyond straight. Is what I'm calling it. There's a lot of QC that goes involved, in our shafts here, and we're actually going to be doing a little mini series on YouTube. I'm going to be leading called Beyond Straightness, and I'm probably letting the cat out before the bag, but letting the cat out of the bag in a sense. But our shafts, we are super big on, spine around shaft consistency, weight per batch consistency, or lot per lot is what we'll say, year in, year out. And then, the spine consistency itself, and then the straightness, the end wobble is the big thing, the knock end and the front end. We did a study a couple years back, and the front end can have some wobble on it and be fine. It's the knock end is what really can mess with people as far as the wobble on it. But, the ProComps, every one I've ever tested, man, and I worked at a shop prior to getting to Easton for about 8 years. It's their money, everything that Easton puts out, in the sense, if it has, even our 3,000 shafts, you can spin them, and sometimes they're going to spin, close to 1,000th of an inch. They just barely miss that QC of a match grade round is what we'll call it. But yeah, the ProComps they're very precise in every aspect you could think of.
No, I appreciate that. I'm trying to think. So when you're coming down to tuning, if I got this initial cut, let's say I'll start at 29 inches with 130 grain points. How do you determine that you need to either one, take off some point weight, or two, take off a little more length on the shaft? What's the best way to make that call?
So let's just go through a scenario. Let's say you're getting a perfect tear through paper. You get your bow sighted in, and most people call this walk back tuning or group tuning 1. They'll get it sighted in at 20, 30. If you start to see everything veering off a little bit to the left, typically what I've done, that's a stiff arrow for me. So I'm going to add point weight, and that's why I keep my shafts long, because once you cut a shaft, you can't add anything back to it. I'd rather be safe than sorry in these scenarios. So I'll leave them long, for a reason. And I'll even leave a little bit more point weight up front for a reason. And let's say if we're veering off a little bit to the left, that's a stiff shaft. So, we're going to have to break that down. We're going to have to add more point weight to it. Now, if we have a shaft that's constantly veering off to the right, as far as impact from the target, and we've got everything lined like we're supposed to, then that's a weak shaft. So that means I'm either going to take some point weight out, or I'm going to chop down that shaft 1. Or I could go in reverse and I can actually add weight to the back of the shaft, as far as whether it's going with a different vein. Even the knot collar, you're talking only a couple grains, but even that might, stiffen that shaft up a little bit and wad those groups in. So.
Oh, good. I appreciate. I didn't think about the weight on the back at all being an impact. So I guess, yeah, it comes down to the two. If I start off with the knock shafts, I don't like how the knock collars. I don't like how they're tuning. I could always just remove the knock collars, and maybe I'll see a difference in that regard.
Yep. Indeed. And then even, knock tuning is one of those things that's kind of, I call it black magic in archery. Sometimes you can turn the knock on a shaft, and, our job here at Easton is to have to eliminate that with our spine around shaft consistency and stuff. But as far as with, other shafts in the market, a lot of guys will end up turning those knocks. It can be kind of tedious, but we haven't seen any issues as far as the ProComp side of things that way.
Yeah, I have definitely used kind of knock turning in the past, especially with hunting arrows and broadheads, and I've seen wild differences.
It is black
turning an arrow, either if it's 4 flushed a quarter turn, or if it's 3 flushed a third of a turn, and it's like going around the clock. It's amazing how much that one little difference makes. And some arrows are perfect no matter which way they turn, and some are perfect in one particular spot. It's a weird science.
It is, man. And a lot of it can come down to the knock as well, whether how well that knock is seated inside the shaft itself. Most knocks, if you notice, they'll come with a little groove on there. And I noticed this a couple years back. I was playing with some shafts and turning them with a customer at a shop I worked at. And, we were looking at the grooves, and the grooves were slowly, grinding away. And that knock fitment was actually not good, And another thing to look into it is as far as the fitment on the serving itself. You don't want to, what I tell guys to do is pull their string back maybe a quarter of an inch or half an inch or so and let it go and see if that arrow, comes off that serving. If it does, then you've got pretty good knock fit, but you don't want it to be stuck on there and hung on there. That can cause other tuning issues. That's a whole nother realm you can go down.
Yeah, again, the knock fit has always been a weird one for me, because I always thought there should almost be a universal thing, but why don't manufacturers make sure their serving and their string is the same all around, so then the arrow manufacturers can do the same? It'll make everyone's life a little bit easier, but I suppose it's too much to ask everybody to get along.
Oh, you're right. And there's and I think everybody makes a good knock, for what everyone's coming out with. And I think it comes down to customization of strings too. 9 times out of 10, everyone I know that when they get a brand new bow, they're already having a new set of strings on the way to freshen it up how they want to look. And, as far as the color scheme to match on certain bows and stuff like that. And that can come down to the, let's say like a manufacturer like Gas. If you go with their Freak Show string, their strands, I believe they add a little bit more strand count, for that string set. So that can even throw off your serving, as far as your knock fitment, being the serving might be thicker around the strings itself. So there's just there's a lot going on into that.
Cool. All right, Cody, I think that's about all I got for you. Thank you very much for kind of answering all the questions and giving me something to start with.
Of course, man. Send some pictures to me. You got my email address. I'd love to see how everything turns out. But like I said, I'd probably start your setup, man. What target bow are you running? What are you going to be running by chance?
Right now I've got the Hoyt Stratos 40 with the HPT cams in.
You like it, the new cam system?
Yeah, I'm getting comfortable with it. I was real comfortable with I had the Invicta 37 with the like the spiral, or what, it's not called spiral anymore, but the SVX cam on there, which I like that a lot. I can't decide if I like that the slightly shorter length of the knot, but I mean, I'm a tall guy, so I think I'm supposed to shoot a longer bow.
Oh,
but it's
I think a 40 is yeah, if you got a 30-inch draw length, man, I think a 40 is a good fit for you. And like I said, I don't work for those guys at Hoyt, but there's a lot of good people over there, and that HBT cam they've got is sweet, It is
it
very
shoots real nice. It's a surprisingly smooth draw cycle for the amount of power. It's a fairly speedy bow. I mean, more so than like the the GTX or the X3 cam was for sure.
Oh yeah.
Maybe not quite as quick as the Spiral is, but it's also a little bit less aggressive. And just I love that 1/4 inch draw length adjustment.
I was about to say the modularity of that bow, the adjustments that you can do. I think you can get down to 1/8 inch adjustments with the grip system that they've got into place with that. But yeah, man, if you're running that setup, I would start your shaft at 29, throw that full 130 grain HL point in there, and see how they're group tuning. If you're constantly seeing something group to the left, that's typically the sign of a stiff shaft. Being if everything you feel like your form's on point from where it has been, shooting very consistent and stuff. Don't be afraid to make that shaft a little bit, break that shaft down even more. And then if it's flying to the right, typically, like I said, what I've seen, that's a weak shaft. So, we're going to chop down that shaft a little bit, or maybe take off some point weight, or add some weight, or excuse me, we're going to, add some weight in the back to stiffen that shaft up.
All right, Cody, thanks for your time.
Of course, brother, man. Looking forward to talking to you soon.